Hi again. The dietary guidelines are written guidelines that we've been looking at, but the U.S. and other countries have seen the need for visual, condensed representations of what it takes to eat healthy. So enter the various pyramids, the various food guides that are out there. The Food Guide Pyramid was first released in 1992. Many of you have probably seen this pyramid before. I know people in the U.S., we'd see it cropping up on cereal boxes and such. It consisted of 5 primary food groups and what range or what kind of serving range was recommended for those. It lists the types of foods rather than the directions on what to eat. So it was just kind of emphasizing food groups. And, was kind of a way to help people achieve the DRIs, the dietary reference intakes, because by emphasizing the servings that were recommended, you would get that spectrum of intake that would help you achieve nutrient needs. However, because there really weren't recommendations in terms of what to choose within the groups, then a new version of the pyramid was introduced a few years ago. It showed more of a vertical representation of the food groups with emphasis of the ones at the base, more emphasis on whole grains, for example, low-fat dairy foods, that kind of things, and less emphasis on the foods from within the group that were towards the top of the pyramid. This also was aligned with an online application where it could be personalized in terms of serving sizes, because the actual pyramid depiction did not include specific ranges of serving sizes as the previous edition. So with the challenges of the pyramid and some of the application aspects in terms of the practical use aspects, a new system was devised called ChooseMyPlate, which was implemented in around 2011, that represented ways to, within a meal, balance your food intake in terms of recommended percentages of food. More emphasis on vegetables and whole grains, fruits, protein. And you can see it's a fairly simple depiction, but it's just kind of how your plate should look and the proportion of each food. Again, like earlier versions of the pyramid, it doesn't really have in the visual recommendations of what to choose within those groups. You have to kind of dig a little deeper. And again, this is an online application that you can go in and enter your own height, weight, and such at this website, and it will give you what's recommended in terms of your calorie intake and specifics in terms of the number of servings from each of these groups, and with recommendations in terms of what to emphasize within these groups. The ChooseMyPlate.gov actually is an excellent website. It has a diet tracker. It tells you things about activity in terms of tracking your activity, and more specifics in terms of using the MyPlate. So there's lots of useful tools that go along with this at the website that you will find. And you can see here, this is a depiction of some of the recommendations for the actual choices within the groups. More healthful choices that come from the different groups of foods that are depicted on MyPlate. The basics are enjoy your food overall, but eat less. Moderation in terms of portion sizes, not eating large portion sizes, which is a great challenge in terms of our obesity epidemic. Also emphasizing foods to increase, make half your plate fruits and vegetables, and at least half your grains whole grains, like the dietary guidelines also recommended, and using lower fat dairy foods. Also within that, foods to reduce, which again aligns with the dietary guidelines, less sodium, less solid fats, and having more, say, water instead of sugary drinks as beverage choices. So all those kind of go along with the ChooseMyPlate. This is just a screenshot of some information you might find if you went online and entered some of your information in terms of telling you what your food groups are, what number of serving sizes are there. A very interesting component of the kind of information you will get is how many calories are considered sort of empty calorie foods or discretionary calories. We all have a little elbow room. That we can meet our basic needs in terms of food groups, and then we have some calories to spare. That we can use more of our fats within that, potentially sugar, alcohol would fall into that classification. That's going to be different for different individuals. The more active you are, in general, the more discretionary or empty calories you have to play with, so to speak. And the smaller individuals are going to have a less amount because they don't have the same body weight to maintain, and yet they have very similar nutrient needs. Within a report, a project that I have my students do, I have them talk about discretionary calories and what percentage of those calories are contributing to their overall calorie intake. Almost across the board, most students exceed their discretionary or empty calorie goal with what their actual intake is, whether it be through sugary foods, through added fats, or through alcohol, that it's very easy to get that up. And the more proportion you have of empty calorie or discretionary foods within your diet, the less likely you are to meet your nutrient needs. So, you know, it's an indicator of that, but it's an interesting component. It also demonstrates that you don't have to be absolutely perfect, that there are ways to work in some foods that we think of as less than good foods if we do so in moderation and if we do so in relation to our other food choices that we make. Not everyone, of course, is fully behind the MyPlate. As with every recommendation, there's always challenges from other health groups, from other experts in terms of whether it's ideal, whether it's representation. This is something from Harvard that is a different representation of the healthy eating plan. And you can see with Harvard's version, the vegetable group is even higher, that there's a little more emphasis on whole grains, a little less on protein. And actually, the dairy component is replaced with water in the Harvard pyramid, and healthy fats are a portion of it. So this is just to illustrate that even though things like MyPlate, the dietary guidelines, they all are evidence-based, have great information, there's always going to be some question. There's always going to be, you know, some groups that are going to, and oftentimes vary with valid points, that, you know, there could be some fine-tuning, some revising. So this is an evolution, and hopefully by seeing the history of the dietary guidelines, the evolution of the depictions through pyramids and plates, that you see that, you know, we don't pretend to have all the answers. The government doesn't pretend to have all the answers, that there's much we can learn along the way. But the point is that based on the evidence we now have, based on the science, and based on how it all fits within our population group in terms of health risk, in terms of trends, these are some of the best recommendations that we can make to our population. Another diet I just wanted to mention, or another recommendation, so to speak, is what we call the DASH diet. I've given you the website here. This is a diet that is specifically targeted at hypertension, and yet it has some excellent principles that with use of the DASH diet, dietary approaches to stop hypertension. Many of the principles there go a long way also in terms of heart disease risk, in terms of reducing cancer risk for certain types of cancers, and for weight management. The principles are excellent within the DASH diet, and evidence demonstrates that individuals that tailor their intake closer to the DASH guidelines are able to control their blood pressure a little better. A lot of emphasis on fruits and vegetables, on inclusion of dairy foods in a certain proportion, low-fat dairy foods. So, you know, explore the DASH diet, but the dietary guidelines, the MyPlate, the DASH diet, these are all recommendations that are out there. And in the next segment, we'll look at diet recommendations from around the world and some of the food guides, some of the depictions, and some of the recommendations that we find in other countries, and maybe how those match up or align with U.S. recommendations.